Hi, it's Dwyer. It's September 22nd, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Since the Crawford Canelo fight, I've made a few videos here on different things, right? I think the most recent one was on Ray Robinson. And I notice I always get a couple of comments from people who, are demanding to know how I could have scored the Canelo Crawford fight for Canelo, right? And I changed the order of the names because at the time of the fight, top billing should go to the unified, in fact, the undisputed champion. Now, folks, I have no doubt, none whatsoever, that if people looked at that fight today, right, looking back on the fight, they'll see things they may not have seen the same way on fight night. Well, what I want people to understand is I'm dead serious when I say I gave Canelo the first 5 rounds. I'm not alone in believing that Canelo is winning the fight at the end of 5 rounds. In the description of this video, I'm going to put the best article I know of that discusses Ring Magazine's AI judge. Right now, understand, I have a slightly different scorecard than Ring Magazine's AI judge. Right? But people need to understand that the AI judge, who I assume wasn't biased toward the champ, didn't give the champion the possession argument that I made before the fight, right? Didn't automatically default to giving the champ all the close rounds. Just understand that Ring Magazine's AI judge had Canelo winning 4 of the first 5 rounds. Let me repeat that. 4 of the first 5 rounds. As I saw the fight, I thought it was uneventful. Right? I thought Canelo, because of a fast start, and understand, forget my scorecard. If you were going by Ring Magazine's AI judge, Canelo at the end of 5 rounds, in other words, well into the fight, was ahead by 3 rounds. If you're watching a fight and a champion, and in this case it's a champion times 4, he has 4 belts, who's up by 3 rounds, again 3 rounds after the first 5, the fight's pretty much over unless the other guy drops the champ, gets a 10-8 or 10-7 round, right? Unless there's some dynamic that pops up where you notice the champ can no longer throw an arm because he's popped a pec muscle like Eddie Chambers once did in a fight, right? Or the champ, has a closed eye and can no longer see shots coming from certain angles. You need something big to offset a 3-round margin. Well, understand, on my card it was a 5-round margin. Right? So, while Crawford certainly dominates the 11th and 12th, folks, I also gave him the 10th round. Right? I said so after the fight. I thought Crawford wins the 6th and the 7th rounds. Right? Here's the problem. Canelo's the champ. While he gets embarrassed in the 11th and 12th rounds, those are Crawford's best. While Crawford starts to open up and actually snaps Canelo's head back, while Canelo loses track of where Crawford is at one point, right? Crawford's over his shoulder, Canelo is spun around. those rounds, each of them are 10-9 rounds, not 10-8. No one hit the canvas. Certainly not 10-7. Right? So, sure, I can say Canelo lost the last 2 rounds. The 10th round's close. I gave that round to Crawford. But I believe that Canelo wins the 8th round, doesn't he? Doesn't Canelo win the 9th round? So, folks, you're talking about a fight where Canelo, in my eyes, won at least minimum 6 rounds. Right? My final scorecard had Canelo winning 7-5. Right? I'm okay with 6-6 because that would have kept the status quo. Canelo would leave with his titles. 2 of the judges had it 115-113. The fight is so close that if you switch the 12th round to Canelo, it's a draw even with these judges. Right? Understand, on their scorecards, going into the 12th round, Canelo still had a chance at a draw. That's on their scorecards. Right? So I know the day after the fight, crowd dynamics takes over. Right? Folks, I have the utmost respect for Crawford. I think he's a great fighter. I think he's been a first ballot Hall of Famer for several fights. Right? I've been following Crawford's career here online publicly for years, as people know. Right? I picked Crawford over Errol Spence. And understand, before the fight, it was dodgy. Right? Spence looked great against Ugas. Spence was unbeaten, just like Crawford was. Spence was a monster. Right? I've taken Crawford when, Crawford wasn't the obvious pick. Now, that said, right, and I thought Crawford-Victor Postal was a great fight. Right? Just understand that even with people openly questioning the scores, right, how they were so close supposedly, even with Lennox Lewis, Oscar De La Hoya, Robert Garcia, Abel Sanchez, all talking about, the masterful job that Terence Crawford did. Lennox Lewis goes further and openly wonders how the judges could have it 115-113. Folks, the AI judge had it 114-114. Right? As you look back on the fight, the issue isn't who exceeded expectations the most. Right? That shouldn't be the issue. The issue should be, how could an undisputed champion lose his belt in a fight where he's ahead after 5 rounds? And he's never cut, he's never dropped, he's never hurt. There's never a moment in the fight where you're looking at the clock, 20 seconds are left, and you privately think to yourself, is Canelo going to make it to the bell? Folks, there's nothing like that. So let me point out, I'll leave a second link. Right? I'll leave a second link in the comment section of this video. The first is going to have the AI judges round by round scoring. Again, I had Canelo up 5-0. Right? I admit some of the rounds were slow. So when I see a slow round and Crawford hasn't made the case in that round to take the title, right, I'm going to give that round to the incumbent. Nothing against Crawford. Canelo, let's just say I've been harder on Canelo in the past than I have Crawford. Right? I have some viewers, Aztec Warrior and others, who feel I'm biased against Canelo. It's not like I'm a big member of the Canelo fan club. Now, don't get me wrong. I have the utmost respect for Crawford and Canelo. Right? If I were a Hall of Fame voter, I don't even have to look at the numbers or film. The first time either is eligible, I would vote them in the Hall. Right? But just understand, in general, when you have a champion who's a credible champion, right? He's been fighting real opposition. He's been the champion for longer than the last 5 minutes. In my opinion, any round that's slow where, you're thinking, wow, the other guy didn't hurt the champ, didn't drop the champ, didn't, completely box the socks off the champ, I'm going to give those rounds to the champion. The difference between my card for the first 5 rounds and the AI judges, 1 round. Right? So by the time you get to the 12th round, I recognize that Crawford had a better second half of the fight than Canelo. Right? But on my card, he had to make up 5 rounds. Right? Just understand, on the AI judge's card. And the AI judge has Crawford winning the second half of the fight. Right? The AI judge had Crawford 3 rounds behind after 5. Right? So you either believe that this was a come-from-behind victory by Terence Crawford in a fight where Canelo never hits the canvas. Right? Where there's no knockdown. None. You either believe Crawford came from behind against one of the faces of boxing. Right? I don't want to call Canelo the face of boxing in a sport that has Usyk and Inoue. Right? Inoue, by the way, looked spectacular in a fight since this, Crawford-Canelo match. Right? By the way, premium subscribers were able to get the over on that fight. Right? While Inoue looked great, his opponent was so good, that fight went the distance. Well, let me just say, folks, while I see the comeback, I don't see the big comeback. Let me say this too. There's a British paper, this will be the second link, where they ask about the scoring, and they include Ring Magazine's AI judge in the discussion, right? And in that article, at the end of 5, that newspaper's boxing guy had Canelo up 3 rounds to 2. Right? My point to you again is, if you give Canelo the 8th round, the 9th round, folks, he's up at 5 rounds. He's up at 5 rounds against a challenger who, can't be front foot against him. Right? You understood as you watched the fight that Crawford's only chance, even when he's behind early, if you're of the mindset that he is behind early, as I am, right? You got the feeling that Crawford's only chance of winning the fight was by decision. Right? Let me say too, I made a video before the fight, and I said, if you're on the Crawford side of the play, don't even think about Crawford by stoppage. Right? His only chance of winning the fight, this is on film, it's online here, is by decision. Right? Well, understand, as the fight went forward, if you believe Canelo's ahead, even 3-2, at the end of 5 rounds, you understood Crawford's only shot was to outbox Canelo the rest of the way. Right? There wasn't the danger of Crawford getting a stoppage. He didn't come close to getting a stoppage. There are rounds where he embarrasses Canelo. Right? But I would argue in almost every round, Canelo is landing the harder shots. Right? When is the last time you took away a undisputed champion's title, or hell, any champion's title, when that champ landed the harder shots, was never close to getting knocked down, was not marked up, didn't have cuts all over his face, right, during that fight? So, if you want to know how I thought the fight was close, you don't even have to hear it from me. I think the AI judge for Ring Magazine did a great job. Let me just say this too. I don't agree with every round that they scored. Right? They have Canelo winning the 12th round. I thought that was one of Crawford's strongest rounds. Right? I don't agree with every round that they scored. But I agree with the idea that Canelo is the one who gets off to a fast start. Folks, when the bell rings to end the 5th round, I didn't think the fight was close. Going into the last round, while I was appreciating Crawford's work, right? Crawford's turning Canelo. Crawford's blocking a lot of Canelo's left hooks to the body, right? Crawford has taken Canelo's right hand out of the mix, right? Crawford even starts coming on his front foot, right? While I was appreciating Crawford's work, I thought it was too late. I thought Crawford's game plan for the first 5 rounds was simply to survive, right? He only had 7 rounds left. For me, he had to get a clean sweep, right? I didn't think he won the 8th and 9th rounds. I thought the 10th round was close. I gave it to Crawford in real time, right? But I thought the 10th round was close. In other words, I didn't see the case being made by the challenger of a clean sweep of the last 7 rounds of the fight, right? I thought that for Crawford to win, and I was surprised when I heard the scorecards, right? I thought for Crawford to win, he would need to outbox Canelo by a bigger margin than he did. If you're looking at the second half of the fight and you're thinking to yourself, wow, who really did win the 10th round? Right? Didn't Canelo win the 8th round? Didn't Canelo win the 9th round? Folks, if they're iffy rounds, ties go to the champion. Understand, if the scorecards are tied, the champion defends his title. As it was, the reality is that 2 judges had to give the 12th round to Crawford to have Crawford winning on their scorecards. Right? So when Lennox Lewis, God bless him, right? Fellow Jamaican, one of my favorite fighters. But when Lennox Lewis says, gee, how could these judges, not have had the fight wider? I'm thinking the exact opposite. How could these judges think that off this fight, an undisputed champion deserved to lose his titles? Right? Lands the harder shots, isn't hurt, isn't dropped. You didn't get the feeling the ref's protecting him. You get the feeling even in the second half of the fight, he, clearly wins rounds like the 8th round. Right? The second half of the fight to me is 4-2. Right? It's not like Crawford wins the second half of the fight 6-0. So I know it's not a popular position. We want heroes. Crawford is easy to like, because, the guy's nickname is Bud. He's low key. I got the feeling that he went out of his way to try to get Errol Spence in the ring. He sets up things in fights where he's willing to look bad, to have the other guy walk into shots. I thought he literally lured Yorkis Gamboa into the uppercut that changed that fight. Right? I saw him hit the canvas against Mean Machine, a guy he feels hits harder than Canelo. Crawford then comes in, figures out that if he throws punches, my read on that fight, from low down, kind of like a Larry Holmes approach, that Mean Machine couldn't track the punches. Right? It was audacious. As I said, when you look at Crawford, he's even better than you think. Right? This is the computer guy in the ring. Right? This is the guy who's thinking and who's out-strategizing opponents. Right? Crawford's great. Crawford was first ballot before this fight. Canelo would have kept his title on my scorecard had I been a judge for this fight. Right? I didn't see where Canelo lost the match. One man's opinion, if you want to continue writing me saying, I don't understand, or how could, anyone feel that Canelo did better than Crawford the first 5 rounds? Folks, you should be asking these questions of the Ring Magazine AI judge, who had Canelo up 4-1, up by 3 rounds after the first 5. Right? Let's do the math. For Crawford to come back from a 3-round deficit after the first 5, there are 7 rounds left after that. Right? Crawford would have to go 5-2 to get the draw. Right? And that's what Ring Magazine's AI judge believes he did. Right? 5-2. It's not like people are shorting Crawford. 5-2 against Canelo. 5 of 7 rounds. Just to get the draw after starting down 3 rounds. Right? 4 rounds to 1. Right? Think it through. Let me close with this. Fame is interesting. Right? We could look at the movie Titanic. Kate Winslet, wins awards. She is great. Every time I look at that movie, I'm astonished by Leonardo DiCaprio. But yet, he wasn't the award winner. Right? I need for people to understand that we can look at someone and say, this person is great. Right? But there's a curve where we don't want to reward someone sometimes who's had a lot of success. So I mentioned this story before. During the Canelo Jaime Munguia fight, I happened to be online. Right? And I was riveted. You had a lot of people on X talking about the fight. And from the names and the pictures, right, people have photos that they have as part of their profile and stuff like that. It looked to me like the thread I was following had a lot of young Latinos. Right? So, I thought, well, obviously, everyone here understands that Canelo's a real champion. Right? This is a guy, as I like to say, who showed up when there were 4 champs at 168, and he mows them down one at a time. In other words, he's not getting an undisputed title by fighting someone who's undisputed. No, this is the guy who's picking it up one at a time. Right? So I thought, obviously, this crowd is going to love Canelo. And the crowd was openly rooting for Jaime Munguia. Right? Openly rooting for Jaime Munguia. Now, this reminds me of when, years ago, the best basketball player I ever saw, Michael Jordan, was so taken for granted that I was watching an All-Star game. He throws down history's first triple-double in an NBA All-Star game. And keep in mind, he's playing part-time because it's an All-Star game, right? You know, he's out of the game so other stars could play. He gets a triple-double. And they gave the MVP to Glenn Rice. It was ridiculous, right? Also, you know, look, Karl Malone was a great player. There's no way anybody in the Jordan era deserved an MVP that year other than Michael Jordan. But yet they gave the MVP to, you know, Karl Malone, right? So I'm serious when I quote Wilt Chamberlain as saying, no one roots for Goliath, right? Look, I like Bill Russell as much as the next guy. There is no way anybody else should have won MVP the year Wilt averaged over 50 points a game. Right? But let's do pattern recognition. There comes a time where we look at a guy like Jordan, where we look at a guy like Canelo, and we say to ourselves, you know, we've celebrated this guy enough. Right? I was expecting the crowd in Vegas, right? Canelo in Vegas. I was expecting the crowd to be much more on Canelo's side of the ledger. Right? They weren't. It's almost as if we got Canelo fatigue. Right? Well, folks need to realize that whatever fatigue we have, after the first 5 rounds, while I had Canelo up 5-0, somebody else could have had Canelo up 4-1. Right, folks? Canelo was well on his way to winning the fight. Now, unless you feel Crawford does better than 5-2 over the last 7 rounds, Crawford shouldn't have had his hand raised at the end. Right? That's how I saw it. This is going to be hopefully the last video I make where I comment on the scoring of the fight. Folks, you know, my advice to you is to wait a few more months. Have all the hoopla of the moment die down. And then quietly, by yourself, when no one's around, pull up the video, grab a chair, grab a beer. If you're of age, sit down and rewatch the fight. If you watch the first 5 rounds and you have Canelo winning 4 or more, right? If you have Canelo winning 3 of the first 5 rounds, then recognize that the idea of pundits saying, oh, gee, how could 2 of the judges had it 115, 113 for Crawford, right? That's ridiculous. This was a competitive fight. Crawford closed strong. Canelo's never hurt. Canelo's never dazed and confused. Canelo landed the harder punches throughout the match. Canelo's on his front foot. Crawford's moving away, while Crawford's good on his back foot. Right? There's never a moment where you're thinking, wow, Canelo's going to get knocked down. Right? Never. Those are my thoughts. You know the floor is always open for yours. I hope you leave them in the comment section of this YouTube video. And please check out both links that I'm going to leave in the description. Thanks for stopping by.